The first time Richard Carpenter tried to describe what really happened, he didn't reach for a headline or a tidy lesson. He reached for breath. For years he had lived inside a hush built from duty, guilt, and the stubborn echo of songs that outlived the rooms they were recorded in. Audiences heard pristine harmonies. He heard the missing pieces. He had the rare vantage point of brother, arranger, and eyewitness, the person closest to a voice so pure it could still a room, and to a life unraveling right beside him. When he finally began to talk, the Carpenter's story shifted from a triumph everyone knew to a family drama few understood. Karen Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950, in New Haven, Connecticut, a second child in a house already organized around music. Richard, 4 years older, was the prodigy, perfect pitch at 4, writing little tunes at 5, the kind of kid a mother can build a future around. Agnes did exactly that, tracking lessons, praising milestones, lifting Richard up as proof that her instincts were right. Karen, by comparison, was the child people joked about: pots, pans, noise. She felt that difference early, and it never really left. Their father, Harold, worked in printing, earning just enough to keep the family afloat. In 1963, convinced California would turn Richard's talent into a career, Agnes spearheaded a move to Downey. The financial math was simple and scary. Sell New Haven for roughly what Downey would cost, start over in a place where the right person might hear her son. Letters to relatives bubbled with Richard's promise. Karen's name rarely appeared. She was 13, shy and conspicuous at a new school where her East Coast vowels gave her away. By 1965, the siblings had a trio with bassist Wes Jacobs. The Richard Carpenter trio stunned judges at the Hollywood Bowl Battle of the Bands, earning studio time and momentum, but their smooth jazz leanings clashed with a landscape dominated by rock. Doors didn't swing open. Then Karen sang. It wasn't a big moment. She tried "I'll Be Seeing You" almost offhand, and Richard froze. The drummer had a contralto that could wrap a melody in velvet and deliver it without a seam showing. The plan changed. They formed Spectrum in 1967, chasing tight harmonies and arrangements built around Karen's warmth. Labels shrugged. Too soft, too clean, too careful for the moment. Richard kept sculpting arrangements that framed her voice, believing time would catch up to them. It did, in the most unlikely way. In 1969, a slowed, aching demo of "Ticket to Ride" landed on Herb Alpert's desk at A&M. He heard what others missed and signed them. Karen was 19 and needed her parents to co-sign the contract. No one in that room could see how fast the climb would burn. Close to You arrived July 25, 1970, and blew the doors off. #1 for 4 weeks, a voice you couldn't mistake within 3 notes, and an album that confirmed it wasn't a fluke. Then We've Only Just Begun, a bank commercial turned wedding anthem, hit #2 on the Hot 100 and held #1 on Adult Contemporary for 7 weeks. Grammys followed, including Best New Artist in 1971. On paper, it looked frictionless. On stage, it was complicated. Karen felt safest behind a Ludwig kit. Audiences wanted her out front. By 1972, management pushed the drums to a cameo and put her in the lights. She complied, but the trade, control for exposure, cut deep. By 1975, the facade cracked. A European tour was canceled for exhaustion. Those close to her knew better. Karen had fallen to 91 pounds, so weak some nights she could barely finish a set. Anorexia nervosa was barely understood, often unnamed, and usually misread. Newspapers speculated about cancer. Strangers whispered theories. Yet in the same year, a Playboy reader's poll ranked her the 10th best drummer in the world, above John Bonham. The irony was brutal. A woman pushed from her own kit being celebrated for a skill she was no longer allowed to fully display. Karen joked about it. She loved Led Zeppelin, but the sting was real. Therapy, when it came, revealed what home would not. In a session in the early 1980s, psychologist Stephen Levin invited Karen's parents. Richard told his sister he loved her. Agnes could not. The sentence hung in the room and went unsaid. If there is a moment Richard still circles in his retelling, it's that one. The opportunity their mother had to place something simple and life-saving in her daughter's hands, and the silence that followed instead. Amid the hurt, a rebellion. While Richard entered rehab for Quaalude dependence in 1979, Karen chased independence the only way she knew, through music that wasn't filtered by the partnership. She flew to New York to work with Phil Ramone, the producer behind Paul Simon and Billy Joel. The sessions lit her up. Sleek disco touches, jazz turns, a grown woman's phrasing. Simon was so moved by her reading of Still Crazy After All These Years, he tweaked a lyric for her. Friends who heard Roughs said it was the most alive she'd sounded. For the first time, Karen could hear a life in which she wasn't small. Then she brought the album home. Richard, newly sober and protective of the brand he'd spent a decade refining, heard betrayal. Herb Alpert listened and called it unreleasable. The label shelved the project and charged nearly $400,000 in costs against the Carpenters' future royalties. It wasn't just a business decision. It felt like a door slamming shut on the only room where Karen had just breathed freely. The album wouldn't see daylight until 1996, long after she was gone. Into that void stepped a man who looked like rescue. In 1980, Karen met real estate developer Thomas Burris, 9 years older, polished, attentive. Within 2 months, they were engaged. She wanted ordinary, a marriage, a home, kids. Days before the Beverly Hills Hotel wedding, she learned Burris had undergone a vasectomy and had no intention of reversing it. She turned to Agnes, who reportedly told her to proceed. Appearances mattered. The ceremony went on. The marriage unraveled with startling speed. The man in the fine suit was drowning in debt. He borrowed generously from Karen's accounts, then cut at her with cruelty, mocking her body, calling her a bag of bones, insisting no one could love her as she was. It was the worst kind of reinforcement for a person already fighting a disorder that twists identity and appetite into weapons. Despite everything, the last weeks contained light. On December 17, 1982, she visited the Buckley School in Sherman Oaks and sang carols for her godchildren and their classmates, a gentle moment that would be her final performance. On January 11, 1983, at the 25th anniversary of the Grammys, she looked fragile but animated. Dionne Warwick noticed a glow. Karen even joked, "Look at me, I've got an ass," a flash of humor that made friends believe she was truly turning a corner. On February 1st, she met with Richard to talk about plans. More recording, maybe touring. A future was back on the table. On the morning of February 4th, 1983, at her parents' home in Downey, where she was preparing to sign divorce papers, Karen collapsed in a walk-in closet. Paramedics found her heart beating 6 times a minute. She was rushed to the hospital and pronounced gone at 9:51 a.m. She was 32. Nearly 1,000 mourners filled Downey United Methodist Church 4 days later. Olivia Newton-John and Dionne Warwick came. So did Thomas Burris, who placed his ring in the casket, a gesture that stunned those who knew how cruel the marriage had been. Karen was laid to rest at Forest Lawn and later moved to Westlake Village to lie beside her parents. The coroner's conclusion confirmed what many had only guessed: heart failure linked to long-term anorexia and the misuse of medications. Richard was left with grief and a ledger of moments that wouldn't stop replaying. The therapy session where a daughter didn't hear the words she needed. The nights on the road when he enforced a schedule she couldn't keep. The sessions where his perfectionism pushed a take past the point her body could handle. The ways addiction scrambled his judgment when she needed his clarity. He admits he saw signs and didn't fully understand their danger until the opportunity to intervene was gone. What he did understand and still insists on is the size of her gift. Karen's contralto is one of those instruments that folds the listener in, warm, precise, heartbreak in the vowels. It is the sound of closeness without performance. He spent the years after her death guarding that sound. He remastered albums, curated compilations, and in 1996 finally released the Phil Ramone sessions so people could hear the version of Karen that had briefly existed in New York. Adult, exploratory, determined. The record is a time capsule and a door, what she might have walked through if life at home had been kinder. Richard also keeps telling the part that isn't pretty about how adoration can mask illness, how family myths can stunt the child who doesn't fit them, how a business can consume the person at its center. He doesn't tell it to settle scores. He tells it because silence almost swallowed it once, and because the audience that fell in love with the sound deserves to know what the sound cost. The Carpenters weren't a fairy tale that soured. They were a miracle married to a system that didn't know what to do with miracles that want to change. Listen closely now, and you can hear that tension in the big songs. Close to You is devotion and doubt. We've Only Just Begun is a promise and a prayer. Even the arrangements, as plush as they are, carry a kind of ache, strings that bloom and then pull back, woodwinds that smile and then fall to thought. Richard built those choices from instinct. He says he was writing for her voice. What he couldn't say then is that he was also writing for her distance, the space between the woman the world saw and the sister he was trying to keep safe. There will always be argument about what might have saved Karen Carpenter. More time away from the road, different doctors, a mother who could say "I love you" out loud. Richard doesn't pretend to know. He lives instead with what he can carry, the catalog, the duty to keep it honest, and the memory of the last good conversation. Two siblings sketching a future that felt briefly possible. He has learned that legacy is not just the records you leave behind. It is the truth you attach to them so the next person can read the map. Karen's voice keeps finding new listeners because it bypasses fashion. It is unguarded and exact. You can hear the drummer in her phrasing, the way she sits the beat just enough to make a line human. You can hear the daughter and the sister too. The songs don't solve the story. They honor it. That might be the most anyone can ask of music. What Carpenter song speaks to you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button if you felt something real, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.